The sling ring had never failed him before. That was the thought running through Stephen Strange's mind as the golden sparks of his portal sputtered, convulsed, and then exploded, outward in a cascade of crackling energy that felt nothing like the clean, dimensional threading he had spent years mastering. One moment, he had been standing in the Sanctum Sanctorum, tracing a precise gateway back from the dark dimension's outer boundary, after sealing a fracture point that had threatened to unravel three converging realities. The next, the dimensional fabric beneath his feet simply rejected him, like a body expelling a foreign object, like the universe itself had sneezed. He fell, not through the familiar kaleidoscopic tunnel of a sling ring portal, but through something rawer, older, a current of magic, so thick and so ancient it pressed against his skin like warm water, filling his lungs with the scent of pine resin, wood smoke, and something that reminded him, inexplicably, of old parchment and candle wax. Then the darkness broke open and Stephen Strange fell out of the sky above a forest that had absolutely no business being as enormous or as alive feeling as it was. He hit the treetops with a grunt, his cloak of levitation snapping open like a parachute with its own strong opinions about crash landings, arresting his fall with a bone-rattling jerk before lowering him, somewhat indignantly, into a clearing at the forest's edge. Strange landed in a crouch, one scarred hand pressing into cold, damp grass, his eyes already scanning the perimeter. The forest breathed. That was the only way to describe it. The trees shifted and settled like sleeping giants registering his presence. Somewhere deep in the shadows between the ancient oaks, something massive moved with deliberate slowness, and two luminous eyes blinked at him before disappearing. The air hummed with magical energy. He could feel it immediately, pressing against the boundaries of his mystic art's perception like a frequency just slightly out of tune with everything he knew. Not hostile, not exactly, but profoundly, fundamentally different. Strange straightened and raised his hand, forming the gesture for a basic diagnostic spell, a sweeping scan he used to map dimensional energy fields. The mandala of golden light that bloomed from his fingers was thinner than it should have been, paler, like trying to project a hologram with half the power source missing. The spell still worked, but the feedback it returned made no sense by any framework he had studied under the Ancient One. Magic here was not drawn from dimensional energy. It was not channeled through focused intention and the manipulation of reality's underlying code. It was something else entirely, something that seemed to exist within matter itself, woven into the biological and geological fabric of this world like a second nervous system. The trees contained it. The soil radiated it. Even the air carried traces of recently cast spells that had left invisible fingerprints on the atmosphere, residue from hundreds of practitioners working in close proximity. He turned slowly, following the diagnostic scan's pull, and saw it. A castle. It rose beyond the forest's edge against a sky just beginning to bruise purple with the coming of dusk. Its towers impossibly tall and architecturally ambitious in the way that only truly ancient structures achieved, not designed so much as accumulated, century after century of additions and modifications that should have made the whole thing structurally incoherent, but somehow produced something magnificent instead. Lights blazed warm and gold in hundreds of windows. A vast lake stretched before it, its surface mirror still, reflecting the castle's image with uncanny perfection, and crossing a bridge toward its entrance. Strange could make out the small figures of what appeared to be children, dozens of them, in robes. He stared for a long moment. In his years as Sorcerer Supreme, Strange had visited 47 distinct dimensions and 11 parallel realities. He had negotiated with entities that existed outside the concept of time and fought beings whose true forms would have broken a human mind to perceive directly. He had learned to read a situation fast and adapt faster. What he was reading now was this magical institution, educational in nature, operating in what appeared to be a version of Earth, running approximately 70 years behind his own in technological development, saturated with a form of ambient magic so pervasive it was essentially a second atmosphere. He was not in his universe. The sling ring on his finger confirmed it. sitting cold and inert against his skin in a way it never had before, not broken, but confused, like a compass suddenly confronted with a planet with no magnetic north. He would not be opening a portal home anytime soon. Strange pulled the cloak of levitation tighter. It responded by straightening itself primly, clearly unbothered by interdimensional displacement, and began walking toward the castle. If this world had a magical community substantial enough to build something like that, it had answers. And if it had answers, he could find his way back. He had worked with worse starting conditions. He was halfway across the bridge when the castle's enormous doors swung open, and a figure stepped out to meet him. Tall, unhurried, robed in deep purple that caught the last of the fading light. A beard that suggested either extreme age or a principled indifference to grooming. Half-moon spectacles perched on a crooked nose above eyes that were, Strange noted immediately, far more alert and calculating than the grandfather Ly. Smile beneath them suggested. The old man stopped at the bridge's midpoint and regarded Strange with the specific expression of someone who had seen extraordinary things for so long that they had developed a refined taxonomy for categorizing new ones. My wards, the old man said pleasantly, have not alarmed for an unauthorized magical entry in quite some years. You arrived from above, which is unusual, and your magic, he tilted his head slightly, reads unlike anything I have encountered in a rather long life. A pause. I am Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Another pause, the blue eyes steady and bright. And you, I think, are very far from home. Strange studied him for exactly 2 seconds, long, enough to register the extraordinary, magical depth radiating from this man, a reserves of power that rivaled some of the most formidable sorcerers he had encountered in his own reality, and made his decision. Dr. Stephen Strange, he said, Sorcerer Supreme. He glanced up at the castle, then back at Dumbledore. And yes, considerably far. If you want to see more crossover stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see collide with another universe in the comments below. Now let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Dumbledore's office was exactly the kind of room Strange would have designed if he had wanted to make a visiting sorcerer feel simultaneously welcomed and subtly assessed. Portraits lined the walls, former headmasters, he was told, though Strange noted immediately that they moved, whispered to each other, and tracked him with expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed alarm. A phoenix sat on a perch near the window, regarding him with the patient, ancient intelligence of a creature that had died and been reborn enough times to find most things only mildly interesting. Instruments of unknown purpose cluttered every surface, emitting small puffs of silver smoke and quiet, musical tones that Strange suspected were monitoring him rather than simply decorating the space. On a shelf behind the headmaster's desk, a collection of objects pulsed with magical energy so dense it was visible to Strange trained perception as a soft luminescence, like bioluminescent. Deep-sea creatures arranged neatly between leather-bound volumes. He cataloged all of it in the time it took Dumbledore to pour 2 cups of tea. You are not a wizard, Dumbledore said, settling into his chair with the unhurried ease of a man conducting a conversation he had been anticipating. It was not a question. Not by your definition, Strange replied, accepting the tea mostly, to give his hands something to do while he continued his passive scan of the room. In my world, what I practice is called the mystic arts. It operates on different principles than what I'm sensing here. Dimensional energy, Dumbledore said. Strange paused mid-scan. You're familiar with the concept. I am familiar with many concepts. The blue eyes were steady over the half-moon spectacles. What I find remarkable is that you are using it here, where no such dimensional framework exists in any form our scholars have documented. He folded his hands. Your spells are working, but imperfectly. You can feel that, I suspect. Strange set down the tea. There was little point in being cagey with a man who could apparently read magical signatures the way Strange read dimensional resonance. My abilities are functioning at reduced capacity. The ambient magic in this world is interfering with my connection to the dimensional energy sources I normally draw from, like trying to run a precision instrument on the wrong power supply. He paused. Your magic, by contrast, seems to be everywhere. Intrinsic to the environment itself. It is intrinsic to us, Dumbledore corrected gently. Wizards and witches are born with magic woven into their biology. We do not draw it from external sources. We are, in a sense, the source. He watched Strange absorb this with visible interest. Which makes your presence here particularly remarkable. You are performing genuine magic. I can see that clearly. Through a mechanism our world has no framework to explain. A problem I intend to solve, Strange said. Which means I need information. What I fell into is clearly a magical society with centuries of accumulated knowledge. If there's a way to harmonize my practice with your world's magical infrastructure, it exists somewhere in your records. He met Dumbledore's gaze directly. I'm not here to cause disruption. I need your library. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, not suspicion exactly, but a sharpening of attention. The restricted section of our library contains knowledge that has driven lesser minds to considerable harm, he said carefully. I've read the Vishani tomes, Strange replied. I've translated Dormammu's original edicts from the Dark Dimension's native script. I've spent 6 months studying under the Ancient One in a monastery where the reading material included a manuscript that literally tried to consume readers it found intellectually unworthy. A beat. I survived. I can manage your restricted section. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, remarkably, he smiled. A genuine one this time, reaching the calculating eyes. I suspect you could. He rose and moved to the window, looking out over the darkened grounds. I will grant you access, Dr. Strange. But I must ask something of you in return. Information, Strange said. It wasn't a guess. Transparency, Dumbledore corrected. We are living through a dangerous time. A dark wizard of considerable power is moving against us, against all magical people and many non-magical ones. His name, a slight pause that suggested the name carried genuine psychological weight in this world, is Voldemort. He was defeated once, years ago, and has returned. He is actively seeking objects and allies that amplify his power. The blue eyes found Strange directly. Your arrival will not go unnoticed. You radiate a magical signature unlike anything in our world. Voldemort has eyes and ears in places that would surprise you. And the Ministry of Magic, something cooler entered his tone, has its own interests in containing anything it cannot classify, as if the name had been a summons. A sharp crack of displaced air sounded from the courtyard below. Strange was at the window in 2 strides, down in the torchlit entrance. For figures in dark robes had appeared, not the students. Robes he had seen earlier, but severe, official-looking garments with small insignia he didn't recognize. They moved with the purposeful stride of law enforcement, wands already drawn. Aurors, Dumbledore said, appearing beside him with that unnerving, quiet mobility of his. The Ministry's magical law enforcement. Faster than I anticipated. A pause. It appears someone among the portraits. He cast a mildly reproving glance toward the wall, where several painted faces suddenly found the middle distance. Fascinating, sent word before I could manage the situation. Strange assessed the 4 figures below. Trained combat practitioners, clearly. Wands functioning as channeling instruments for that intrinsic biological magic he had been analyzing. In his current state, a direct confrontation would be unwise, not because he feared them, but because burning energy on a fight he didn't need would deplete reserves he required for research and recovery. I won't hide, he said flatly. I would never suggest it, Dumbledore replied. But there is a considerable difference between not hiding and giving the Ministry something to react to before they have had a moment to think. He turned from the window. Let me speak with them first. You are my guest. That carries certain protections, even the Ministry must respect. For now, the last 2 words carried a weight that suggested they had an expiration date. Strange watched the Aurors below for another moment. One of them, a senior officer by the deference the others showed, was scanning the castle's exterior with her wand raised, clearly tracking his magical signature. She was good. He could see the diagnostic spell she was running from 3 floors up, and it was sophisticated work. He stepped back from the window. I'll be in the library, he said. Dumbledore's eyes crinkled at the corners. Third floor. Password to the restricted section is currently Fox. He moved toward the door. Do try not to alarm the books. Some of them bite. Strange was already forming the mandala for a muffled passage spell, thinner than usual. Frustratingly imprecise. When he registered what Dumbledore had just said, he glanced back. The books bite. Only the truly interesting ones, the headmaster said pleasantly, and descended the stairs to meet the ministry. Strange stared at the empty doorway for exactly 1 second, then turned back to his spell work. In 47 dimensions, he had never once encountered a biting book. He was already recalibrating his threat assessment for this universe. The restricted section bit him twice. The first time was a volume bound in something that felt uncomfortably like dried skin, which lunged off the shelf the moment Strange's fingers brushed its spine and clamped down with surprising force on his left hand. He responded by encasing it in a small containment field, shakier than he would have liked, but functional, and pried it loose with the detached professionalism of a man who had handled possessed objects, considerably more dangerous than an aggressive book. The second time was a slim, unremarkable-looking text titled Dimensional Confluences and the Permeability of Magical Boundaries, which waited until he was 3 chapters deep before sinking its metaphysical teeth into his concentration and flooding his mind with images so disorienting they forced him to physically sit down on the cold stone floor and breathe through the interference, that one he did not put back, because buried beneath the psychic defense mechanism. The book contained something extraordinary, something that made the bite entirely worth it. A complete theoretical framework, assembled by a wizard named Eridanus Voss in the 15th century, describing what happened when magic from outside the world's intrinsic biological system attempted to operate within it. Voss had encountered something similar once, or believed he had, a traveler from what he called the spaces between worlds who had wielded magic through gesture and will alone, without a wand, without the biological inheritance that defined wizarding power. Voss's conclusion, reached after years of study, was that external magic and intrinsic magic were not incompatible. They were, in fact, complementary, two expressions of the same underlying universal force, like two rivers fed by the same distant mountain. The key was resonance. Strange read the passage 4 times. Then he sat in the flickering torchlight of the restricted section, surrounded by quietly hostile books, and began working through the implications with the focused intensity that had once made him the most precise neurosurgeon in the world, and had since made him the most formidable sorcerer in his own reality. If Voss was correct, and Strange's own diagnostic scans were increasingly suggesting he was, then the solution to his power limitation was not to fight the ambient magic of this world, but to attune to it, to let the deep biological magic that saturated this universe's atmosphere serve as a carrier frequency for his own mystic arts, the way a radio signal rode a carrier wave. He was so absorbed that he almost missed the sound of the door. Almost. He was on his feet before it opened, containment mandala forming in his left hand, cloak of levitation rising slightly from his shoulders in alert readiness. The figure that slipped through the restricted section's entrance was young, a teenager, lean and dark-haired, moving with the careful quiet of someone who had done this before and knew exactly which floorboards creaked. He froze when he saw Strange. Strange froze when he saw the scar. Lightning bolt. Forehead. Radiating. A residual magical energy so specific and so dark that Strange felt it from across the room like a cold pressure behind his eyes. "You're the one who fell from the sky," the boy said. Not a question, stated with the flat certainty of someone who had learned that extraordinary things tended to find him specifically. "And you're carrying dark magic in your scar tissue," Strange replied, equally direct. "How long has that been there?" The boy stared at him. "Since I was 1 year old." Strange studied the scar for another moment, reading its magical resonance, the way he would read a dimensional fracture, tracing its edges, feeling its depth, noting the way it pulsed, with a faint echo of power that did not belong to the young man wearing it. It was a mark of transference, of incomplete magical destruction. Something had been lodged there like a splinter that had never been properly removed. sitting so deep it had become part of the host's magical signature. A Horcrux, the boy explained when Strange pressed him, not knowing fully what it meant, just knowing it was something Voldemort had left behind, an anchor of dark magic that Dumbledore believed had been destroyed a year earlier. Those strange readings suggested the resonance, while significantly diminished, had not been entirely eliminated. Harry Potter, the boy said, extending a hand with the resigned air of someone accustomed to the fact that people already knew who he was. You already know about Voldemort. Dumbledore briefed me. Strange shook the offered hand, noting the controlled magical energy that sparked briefly at the contact. Instinctive, biological, strong for someone this young. Dr. Stephen Strange. And I know you came here for the same reason I did. He held up the Voss volume. You've used this library before. Harry glanced at the book. Never found anything that useful. Most people wouldn't. There, looking for spells. Strange tucked the volume under his arm. I'm looking for physics. Before Harry could respond, the torches along the restricted section's walls guttered, simultaneously, not extinguished, but pulled sideways, as though something outside had drawn a breath. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in as many seconds. Strange registered it with his entire body, the way he registered dimensional disturbances, a wrongness spreading through the ambient. Magic like ink dropped in water, darkening everything it touched. Harry's hand went to his wand in a movement so automatic it was clearly muscle memory, burned in through years of genuine danger. His jaw was tight. That's not the castle, he said quietly. No, Strange agreed. His diagnostic scan was already spreading outward through the walls, and what it was returning made him go very still. Outside, beyond the castle's grounds, something was moving through the darkness toward Hogwarts with the slow, inevitable patience of a predator that had never once doubted its ability to reach its destination. Multiple figures, dark magical signatures, dense and purposeful, and threading through them all, like a signal carrying a voice that Strange could not quite resolve, but whose harmonic frequency made every instinct he possessed simultaneously sharpen and recoil, something old, something deliberate, something that was not merely powerful, but that treated power itself as a philosophical statement. Death Eaters, Harry said, the word carrying the weight of someone who had spoken it in genuine terror more times than anyone his age should have had to. Strange lowered the containment mandala and shifted his grip on the Voss volume. His mind was already running calculations, power reserve versus threat level, the resonance attunement theory he had just developed, the specific vulnerabilities in his current operational capacity, and the tactical layout of a castle he had been inside for less than 4 hours. How many ways out of this section? He asked. 3, Harry said immediately. But they'll have the grounds covered. I don't need the grounds. Strange held up his left hand, the sling ring glinting in the guttering torchlight. I need altitude. He met Harry's eyes directly. How good are you on a broomstick? Harry Potter, for the first time since entering the restricted section, almost smiled. Better than anyone else in this school. Outside, the darkness pressed closer, and deep within it, something turned its attention toward the castles, lights with the focused interest of a mind that had spent years learning to recognize the magical signatures of its enemies, and had just detected something it had never encountered before. They came over the astronomy tower. Strange had chosen the position, deliberately, highest accessible point on the castle's exterior, clear sight lines in every direction, and far enough from the student dormitories that whatever was about to happen would not pull sleeping teenagers into the blast radius. Harry had gotten them there in under 3 minutes through a series of passages Strange suspected were not on any official castle map, moving through hidden corridors and behind tapestries with the navigational confidence of someone who had spent years mapping this, building secrets by necessity. Below, the grounds of Hogwarts were no longer dark. Green light moved through the tree line in a pattern Strange recognized immediately as a coordinated tactical approach, not reckless, not emotional, but disciplined. Spread formation, overlapping fields of coverage. Time to converge on multiple entry points simultaneously. Whoever was leading this understood siege tactics at a level that suggested genuine military intelligence. Behind the chaos, he counted 19 distinct magical signatures threading through the forbidden forest's edge, with 3 more circling from the lake's far side, and 2 holding position at the main road, blocking retreat and reinforcement. 24. A substantial commitment of resources for an intelligence-gathering operation. This was not intelligence gathering. They're not here for information, Strange said, watching a curse bloom, vivid and terrible against the darkness. As the Aurors Dumbledore had been managing below made contact with the outer perimeter of Death Eaters. The exchange was brief and brutal, trained combatants on both sides. Wand work moving faster than untrained eyes could follow. They're here for me. Harry stood beside him at the tower's parapet, broomstick in hand, jaw set with that particular expression Strange had already come to recognize as the young man's version of controlled fear, feeling it completely, letting it exist, refusing to let it make decisions on his behalf. How do you know they're not here for me? That's usually the safer assumption, because 3 of those signatures are stationary at the forest's north edge. Strange replied, they're not tactical support. They're observers. Someone positioned them specifically to watch for a magical signature they've never cataloged before. He turned to look at Harry. You? They've fought. They have countermeasures for you. Whatever Voldemort sent those observers to confirm is something new. Harry absorbed this with the speed of someone accustomed to rapidly incorporating unwelcome information. So what do we do? Strange had been asking himself a version of that question since the moment his sling ring misfired. In his own universe, the answer would have been immediate and overwhelming. Mirror dimension, time manipulation, a dozen offensive and defensive techniques executed with the precision of decades of mastery. Here, working at reduced capacity with a power system he had been studying for less than 6 hours. The answer required more discipline, more strategy. The Voss resonance theory was still untested. His mandala formations were running at roughly 75% efficiency, and the ambient magic of Hogwarts itself, that deep, old, structural magic woven into the castles, stones over 1,000 years of wizarding habitation, was doing something interesting around the perimeter, responding to the threat instinctively, the way a living organism responded to infection. The castle was fighting back. Strange filed that observation carefully. Then he held up his left hand and began forming the most delicate diagnostic spell in his repertoire. Not a combat technique, not a shield, but a pure reading instrument, as sensitive as he could make it, and directed it not at the Death Eaters, but at Hogwarts itself, at the resonance Voss had described, at the carrier frequency of this world's intrinsic magic. He found it in 4 seconds. It felt like tuning a string instrument, a subtle adjustment of intention, a willingness to let his mystic arts stop asserting their own frequency and instead follow the deeper current, already flowing through the stone, beneath his feet, like learning to swim with a river's current instead of across it. The effect was immediate and significant. The mandala in his left hand brightened, sharpened, took on a quality he had not felt since arriving, the clean, precise responsiveness of a properly powered system. Not full capacity, perhaps 85%, but enough. Change of plan, Strange said. He stepped up onto the parapet. What are you doing? Harry demanded, giving the observers something to observe. Strange glanced back over his shoulder. Stay here. If anything gets past me and reaches the tower, use the broomstick and get low. Hug the castle wall. Stay out of open airspace. A pause. Can you do a shield charm? Protego? Yes. Layer 3 of them. Don't wait until you need them. He turned back to the darkness below. And Harry. The name felt strange in his mouth. Too familiar for someone he had known for less than an hour. But this world ran on different social mathematics. Whatever you see me do out there, do not come after me. I need you here and operational, not heroic. Harry opened his mouth. I've said that to people considerably more stubborn than you, Strange added. It didn't work on them either, but I'm contractually obligated to try. He stepped off the parapet. The cloak of levitation caught him instantly, spreading wide, lifting him in a smooth arc above the tower into the cold night air above Hogwarts. The effect of the resonance attunement was even stronger here. Away from the stone, the ambient magic of this world moved freely at altitude, unimpeded by walls and architecture, and Strange rode it the way he rode dimensional currents in his own universe. Not perfectly, not with the effortless fluency that years of practice had given him at home, but with enough control to be precise. He descended toward the tree line. The three observer signatures tracked him immediately, their magical attention swinging toward him like compass, needles finding north. Good. He wanted their attention. He wanted them to send exactly what they were seeing back to whoever was coordinating this operation. Because what Strange had decided, in the 4 minutes since feeling the castle's resonance align with his mystic arts, was that this situation had a specific problem at its center. Not the Death Eaters on the ground, not the tactical pressure on Hogwarts, but the intelligence gap driving Voldemort's decisions. Voldemort knew Strange was here. Voldemort did not know what Strange was. That uncertainty was an asset that would expire the moment. Strange's first combat engagement gave the observers a complete picture of his capabilities, which meant his first engagement needed to be controlled, selective, and deliberately incomplete, showing enough to create fear and confusion, concealing enough to preserve strategic ambiguity. He landed at the forest's edge 30 meters from the nearest Death Eater. The man was tall, masked. Wand raised the instant Strange materialized from the darkness. The curse that left his wand was fast and genuinely dangerous, a cutting hex, modified with a rotational component. That would have been difficult to dodge and ugly to receive. Strange sidestepped it with a movement that was not quite physical and not quite dimensional. The mystic arts and this world's ambient magic blending in his nervous system in a way that felt like two instruments, suddenly finding the same key, and brought his right hand up in a gesture that produced something the Death Eater clearly had no category for. A shield, but not a simple defensive barrier. A curved surface of hardened dimensional energy that caught the hex, bent it, and returned it along a trajectory its caster had not anticipated. The Death Eater dove clear. Strange was already moving, already at the second observer's position, already deploying a containment field around the third that locked the man's wand arm to his side with a grip like cold iron. For seconds, 3 opponents, none of them down, none of them dead, but all 3 now transmitting back to their master a magical signature that matched nothing in the Death Eater intelligence network. No wand, no traditional spell construction, gestures that produced effects wand magic could approximate only imperfectly and at greater cost. A sorcerer who moved between positions with something that was not quite apparition and left no crack of displaced air. Something unknown. In the shadow of the trees, Strange let the observers see exactly that much. Then he let the darkness take him, rising back toward the castle on the ambient current, and felt the precise moment when the intelligence those 3 observers were carrying began its journey back to a mind that Strange had not yet met but had already begun to study. Above the astronomy tower, a teenage boy with a lightning bolt scar watched, all of it from behind 3-layered shield charms, and felt, for the first time in a long time, something he almost did not recognize. Hope, complicated, cautious, and entirely unwelcome in its timing, but undeniably there. Voldemort came at dawn, not in person. Strange had already assessed that the Dark Lord was not the kind of strategist who committed himself to a theater of engagement before he understood it completely. What came at dawn was something more considered and, therefore, more dangerous than a direct assault. What came at dawn was a message, delivered in the specific language of a mind that had spent decades turning fear into a precision instrument. It arrived through the castle's enchanted ceiling. Strange was in the Great Hall when it happened, seated across from Dumbledore, at the staff table in the gray pre-light of early morning. The Voss volume opened between them alongside 3 other texts the headmaster had produced from his personal collection. They had been working through the resonance theory together for 2 hours. Strange outlining the attunement breakthrough he had achieved. Over the astronomy tower, Dumbledore listening with the focused attention of a man encountering a genuinely new idea for the first time in many years and finding it more exciting than alarming. Between them, a theoretical framework was emerging that neither world's magical tradition could have produced independently. The mystic arts structured dimensional methodology applied to this world's intrinsic biological magic, producing a hybrid approach that was, Strange was increasingly convinced, more powerful than either system operating alone. Then the ceiling went dark. Not the natural darkening of clouds, Hogwarts. Enchanted ceiling mirrored the sky outside with faithful accuracy. And what Strange saw spreading across it now was not meteorological. It was intentional, a darkness that moved against the wind, gathering in the center of the vast stone vault above 100 empty house tables, forming itself into a shape that every student and teacher in this castle would recognize as a deliberate act of psychological warfare. The Dark Mark. Dumbledore rose from his seat very slowly. His wand was in his hand, Strange noted, without any visible transition, simply there, as though it had always been there, as though the motion of reaching for it existed in some moment too fast to observe. His face had gone, absolutely still in a way that Strange recognized as the specific stillness of a man containing a very large emotion through very long practice. "He knows you're here," Dumbledore said quietly. "He knew last night," Strange replied, already on his feet, the resonance attunement running through his nervous system like a second heartbeat. Now, more natural with each hour. The carrier frequency of this world's ambient magic, integrating with his mystic arts at a rate that suggested full operational capacity within another day. He did not have another day. This isn't information. This is a choice point. He wants you to make a decision, Dumbledore said. In his experience, extraordinary individuals confronted with a demonstration of his reach do one of two things. They flee, or they seek terms. He's never met a third option, Strange said. From the corridor behind the Great Hall, footsteps, Harry moving fast, Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger half a step behind, all three of them reading the dark ceiling with expressions that mixed dread and defiant familiarity in proportions. That told Strange everything he needed to know about what these three young people had already survived together. Hermione's eyes went immediately to the books spread across the staff table, then to Strange, then to Dumbledore, her mind visibly working through the situation at a speed that reminded Strange uncomfortably of himself at her age. "He's not going to attack the castle directly," she said, arriving at the table and addressing Dumbledore without preamble. "Not with you here," and a glance at Strange. "Whatever Dr. Strange's presence means for the magical balance, he's going to try to negotiate, or he's going to try to isolate." Strange looked at her with renewed attention. "How do you know that?" "Because that's what he did at the Ministry," she said. "He used Harry as leverage to get what he wanted. He prefers to let someone else make the move that costs them something." A pause. "He'll try to use us, Harry specifically, to make you stand down or leave." Strange was quiet for 4 seconds, long enough to run the full tactical calculation she had just handed him, verify it against everything he had observed about Voldemort's operational methodology from the intelligence Dumbledore had shared overnight, and arrive at a conclusion that was simultaneously strategically sound and deeply uncomfortable. She was right, which meant the choice point was not what Strange had initially framed it as, not a question of whether to fight or negotiate, but a question of whether to let Voldemort dictate the terms of engagement at all. In Strange's experience, across 47 dimensions and 11 parallel realities, the most dangerous thing you could do against a strategically sophisticated opponent was allow them to choose the battlefield. Voldemort had spent the last 12 hours observing Strange's capabilities through 3 rattled Death Eater observers and calculating how to neutralize an unknown element before it could be fully deployed against him. Strange needed to change the calculation entirely. "Dumbledore," he said, "how many of Voldemort's Horcruxes remain?" The Great Hall went very quiet. Dumbledore's expression shifted in a way Strange had not seen before, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. A reassessment, rapid and thorough. "How do you know about the Horcruxes?" "Because whatever is left in Harry's scar is a resonance echo of the same magic that constructed them. I read it last night." Strange held the headmaster's gaze. "How many remain?" A long pause. Then, with the careful deliberateness of a man who had spent years guarding this information, like a physical wound, "We believe 2, possibly 1. Harry made a sound that was not quite a word. Strange did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Dumbledore. "Then that's the battlefield," he said. "Not the castle. Not a defensive engagement on ground Voldemort chose. The Horcruxes. They are hidden, Dumbledore said. Finding them requires time and research, which we don't have, and a magical tracking methodology, which you've been developing for years. Strange placed his hand flat on the vast volume between them. I can accelerate that. The resonance attunement I've developed. The hybrid approach combining your world's intrinsic magic with the mystic arts produces a detection sensitivity neither system achieves alone. Dark magic of the specific frequency a Horcrux radiates is, from a dimensional perspective, essentially a beacon. He paused. I can find them. The dark mark above them pulsed once, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat demonstrating its own patience. Dumbledore looked at Strange for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry, at Ron, at Hermione, at three young people who had been carrying the weight of this war in their bones for years, who had paid for every inch of progress against Voldemort in costs. Strange was only beginning to understand the full scope of. Something moved through the old man's expression that was too complex to name simply, containing within it grief and hope and a very old exhaustion and something that looked, beneath all of it, like relief. Then we must work quickly, Dumbledore said. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. The hybrid detection methodology taking shape across 6 hours of concentrated collaboration. That Strange later considered some of the most intellectually demanding work he had done since learning to manipulate time. Hermione's encyclopedic knowledge of dark magical theory provided the Horcrux resonance baseline. Dumbledore's accumulated decades of investigation provided the geographical narrowing. Strange dimensional tracking technique, recalibrated through the resonance attunement to operate on this world's magical frequency, provided the precision instrument. By mid-afternoon, they had 2 locations. By dusk, with Harry beside him and the cloak of levitation, riding the amber evening air above a coastline Strange had never seen before in any universe. He had retrieved the first. The second cost him something. Not his life, not quite, but the Horcrux's dark magical defense. Triggered the moment Strange dimensional energy made contact with it. Produced a feedback pulse that tore through his resonance attunement like a blade. Through a tuned string. He felt the connection to this world's ambient magic snap back violently, dropping him to his knees in a cave that smelled of dark water and older darkness. And for approximately 30 seconds, he was operating on raw mystic arts alone, at the 60% capacity he had arrived with, pouring everything he had into the containment field that held the Horcrux's defense from reaching Harry. Harry, for his part, did not listen to Strange's instructions from Section 4 any more than Strange had expected him to. He was there in the cave, wand blazing, layered shield charms absorbing the feedback pulse's secondary wave, refusing with every fiber of his being to stand back, while someone else paid a price on his behalf. Strange filed that observation too. The Horcrux fell. The containment held. The cave went quiet. Strange sat on the wet stone floor for a moment, breathing carefully, feeling the resonance attunement slowly, painstakingly re-establishing itself as the ambient magic of this world seeped back into his nervous system like warmth, returning to a cold limb. 70%. 75. Climbing. Harry crouched beside him. You all right? Strange considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. His hands were shaking slightly, the scarred, damaged hands that had once been the most precise instruments in a New York operating room and had since become something considerably more complex. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at Harry Potter, this young man who had been marked by darkness before he could speak, and had spent every year since refusing to become it. I've had worse Tuesdays, Strange said. Harry laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded, bouncing off the cave walls and dissolving into the sound of dark water. Outside, the sky over the coastline was the color of old bronze, and somewhere beneath it, a dark lord who had never encountered. A third option was about to discover that the universe, any universe, was considerably larger than his imagination of it. The 2 Horcruxes Strange retrieved that evening did not end the war. Wars of that depth and duration do not end in a single day, no matter what arrives from beyond the dimensional veil to tip the scales. But they changed it, fundamentally, irreversibly, in the way that the removal of 2 load-bearing stones changes the structure above them. Voldemort, denied the intelligence he needed and confronted with losses he had not calculated for, withdrew, regrouped, began reconstructing his understanding of an enemy his decades of dark philosophy had left him entirely unprepared for, a sorcerer who operated outside every magical framework he had ever studied, who could not be corrupted because he had already faced corruption in forms Voldemort could not conceive of, and who had no interest in power for its own sake. Strange remained at Hogwarts for 11 more days, working with Dumbledore to document the hybrid magical methodology they had developed, a bridge between two worlds, understanding of magic that neither tradition could have reached alone. He worked with Hermione on the theoretical implications. He sparred, carefully and with genuine mutual respect, with Harry in the courtyard each morning, learning as much as he taught. On the 12th day, the sling ring found its frequency again. A portal home, thin, uncertain, but real. He stood at its edge for a long moment. "Will you come back?" Harry asked. Strange looked at the shimmering gateway, then back at the castle rising behind them, ancient and luminous and stubbornly alive. "The universe," he said, "is full of wrong doors." A pause. "I've stopped thinking of them as mistakes." He stepped through. The portal closed behind him like a question that had found, if not an answer, then at least a better question to become. "May the Force be with you."